The night was quiet in the city, yet one corner was alive with flashing lights, hurried voices, and the heavy hum of ambulance sirens. A car had broken down in the middle of the road, its hood steaming as if it were about to burst into flames. People passed by, some slowing down for a moment, some curious, but most moved on. In this restless city, people were too busy to stop, but there was one man who did not move on. Keanu Reeves, dressed in his usual simple black jacket and worn shoes, stood by the side of the road. At first, the crowd did not notice him. He blended in, quiet and calm, like he always did. But his eyes were fixed on the scene ahead, where a young man sat on the pavement, holding his leg, pain written all over his face. The boy had been trying to fix the car when it rolled slightly backward, injuring him. Keanu did not think twice. He walked forward, steady and composed. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is that Keanu Reeves?" But before others could turn their heads, he was already kneeling down beside the injured boy. "It's okay," Keanu said softly, his voice steady. "Breathe slow. You're not alone." The boy looked up, confused at first. Then his eyes widened, not because he recognized the Hollywood star, but because of the gentleness in the man's face. Keanu tore a piece of cloth from his own sleeve and wrapped it carefully around the boy's leg to stop the bleeding. The moment carried a strange weight. Here was a man known worldwide, a face on giant screens, a name in headlines. Yet in this small corner of the city he was just a human being helping another human being. A passerby shouted, "Sir, the ambulance is on the way." Keanu nodded but stayed right where he was, holding the boy's hand. "Don't worry," he said again. "You'll be fine." The boy whispered, "Why? Why are you helping me?" Keanu gave a small smile, humble and calm. "Because you need help, that's enough reason." The words hung in the air, and even those watching felt something stir inside them. The world often felt cold, rushed, and selfish. But in that moment, with smoke rising from a broken car, and sirens getting closer, one simple act of kindness broke through the noise. A man from the crowd finally recognized him and said, "You're Keanu Reeves. You don't need to do this, let someone else handle it." Keanu only shook his head. "We all need to do this, not just someone else." Those words struck hard. Silence fell over the people watching. Some lowered their heads, ashamed of how quickly they had walked past without stopping. As the ambulance arrived, the medics came rushing. Keanu helped lift the boy gently onto the stretcher. When the boy gripped his hand tighter, refusing to let go, Keanu leaned closer. "Listen," he said, his voice low but filled with strength. "This moment is hard, but it will pass. You are stronger than you think. And when you heal, remember to stop for someone else too." The boy nodded with tears in his eyes. The ambulance doors closed, but before they did, Keanu placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You're not alone. Remember that." The vehicle drove away, red lights fading into the distance. Keanu stepped back, his hands stained with dust and cloth torn from his own sleeve. People were staring at him now, not because he was famous, but because his actions had shaken something deep inside them. One man whispered, "In a world where everyone runs for themselves, this man reminded us what it means to be human." Keanu looked around at the crowd, his eyes calm, humble, almost shy. Then, without waiting for praise, he turned and walked away into the night. But the people who stood there would never forget that moment. It was more than an accident, more than a rescue. It was a lesson. It was proof that kindness still existed, that humanity was not lost. And for the boy in the ambulance, that night would forever remain the moment when a stranger, who happened to be one of the most recognizable faces in the world, knelt beside him and gave him not just comfort, but faith. That was how it began. A single moment that would ripple into many stories. Stories that showed the world who Keanu Reeves truly was. Not just an actor, not just a star, but a man whose quiet acts of kindness restored faith in humanity. The next morning, the story of the late-night accident began to spread quietly, not through headlines, not through paparazzi photos, but through the voices of ordinary people who had witnessed it. A shopkeeper told his customer, a taxi driver told his next passenger, and slowly the story moved like a ripple across the city. But Keanu did not speak of it. He woke up early, as he often did, put on the same black jacket he wore the night before, and walked to a small cafe. It was one of those quiet places hidden away in a corner street, where the coffee was simple and the people were kinder than most. As he sat down, a waiter came up with a nervous smile. "Sir, thank you for what you did last night." Keanu looked up surprised. "You were there." The waiter nodded. "I saw how you stayed with that boy. People don't do that anymore. I wanted to walk away too, but you made me stop and think." Keanu gave a small nod, his voice soft. "It's not about me. Anyone can stop. It's just that many forget they can." The waiter's eyes filled with emotion, but before he could speak more, another man entered the cafe. He was older, his clothes a bit worn, his face carrying the heavy lines of life. He walked up to Keanu's table slowly. "Are you the one who helped that boy?" he asked. Keanu hesitated, but then nodded. The man sat down across from him without asking for permission. "That boy, he's my son." The cafe grew quiet. Keanu straightened his posture, his calm eyes locking on the man. "How is he?" Keanu asked. The father's hands trembled slightly. As he answered, "He's alive." The doctors said the bleeding could have been worse. They said whoever tied his leg saved him. The man paused, his voice breaking. "That was you." Keanu looked down at the table, his fingers brushing against the edge. "I only did what anyone should do." But the father leaned forward, his voice low and filled with emotion. "No, not anyone. Many people walked past. I saw the security footage. You were the only one who stopped the world as fast. People are busy, but you gave my son a chance." For a moment, there was silence. Then, unexpectedly, tears rolled down the father's face. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You didn't just save him. You reminded me there is still goodness left in this world." Keanu reached across the table and placed his hand gently on the man's shaking hand. His touch was steady, reassuring. "Your son will heal, and when he does, both of you can be the goodness someone else needs one day." The father nodded, unable to speak. Just then, a young girl from another table, no older than 10, walked up shyly holding a piece of paper she had been sketching quietly with crayons. Without a word, she placed the paper in front of Keanu. It was a drawing of him kneeling beside the injured boy, his hand reaching out. The girl looked up at him and said in a soft voice, "You're a hero." Keanu shook his head gently. "No, I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who stopped when he should have." The girl smiled, but her words had already touched everyone in the cafe. The drawing lay on the table, bright and innocent, yet carrying more power than any headline could dot. As Keanu left the cafe that day, the weight of the moment stayed with him. He had always believed that kindness mattered, but now he realized how even the smallest action could echo far beyond what he imagined. Yet not everyone saw it the same way. Outside the cafe, two men with cameras were waiting. Paparazzi who had caught whispers of what happened. One of them stepped forward. "Keanu, tell us about last night. Did you really save that boy? What were you doing there? Were you trying to be some kind of hero?" Keanu stopped. The calm look in his eyes shifted slightly, not in anger, but in disappointment. "Don't make it about me," he said firmly. "Make it about kindness. That's the real story." And with that, he walked away, leaving the cameras flashing uselessly in the air. But the moment was not lost. While some sought to twist it into a headline, others carried it in their hearts. The boy who was saved, his father, the little girl with her drawing, the waiter who promised himself he would never walk past someone in need again, they all became part of a bigger truth. This was not just one story. It was the beginning of many. The days passed, but the echo of that night continued to grow. The boy recovered slowly in the hospital, and his father told every nurse, every visitor, about the stranger who saved his son. Word spread until it reached people far beyond the city. Some called it an act of kindness. Others said it was proof that true humanity still existed. But Keanu Reeves, the man at the center of it all, carried on quietly, avoiding the noise. Fame was never what he chased. In fact, he disliked when simple human actions were turned into headlines. To him, kindness was not a performance. It was life itself. One evening, a charity group reached out to him. They wanted him to attend a fundraiser for children who had lost their families in accidents. They had heard about the night of the broken car, and they believed his presence would inspire donations. Keanu hesitated. He never liked using his name for attention. But when he thought of the young boy on the pavement, the one who held his hand with fear and hope, he decided to go. The fundraiser took place in a small community hall. Nothing fancy, no red carpets, no cameras, just rows of chairs filled with people who cared. The children sat in the front, their eyes wide with innocence and longing. When Keanu entered, there was no applause. The room grew quiet. Some people whispered his name, but he walked humbly, nodding to those who greeted him. He did not stand on the stage. Instead, he sat among the children, lowering himself to their level. A girl in a faded dress tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Are you really famous?" Keanu smiled softly. "Some people say so, but fame isn't important. What's important is being kind." The girl thought for a moment, then said, "Kind people are rare." Her words pierced deeper than any compliment. Keanu looked around at the children, each one carrying scars not always visible. They had lost much, yet they still searched for kindness. Like flowers searching for sunlight. When it was time for speeches, the organizers urged him to say a few words. Keanu stood reluctantly, walking to the front with quiet steps. His hands rested in his pockets, his voice steady but low. "I don't have a speech," he began, "but I have a thought. The world can feel heavy, it can feel unfair, and sometimes it feels like kindness has disappeared. But it hasn't. It's still here, hidden in small moments, a smile, a hand, a word when someone needs it. Kindness is not about changing the whole world at once. It's about changing one person's world, even for a moment." The room was silent. Every child, every parent, every guest held on to his words. They were not spoken like a celebrity giving advice, but like a friend sharing truth. Then, unexpectedly, an older man in the back stood up. His face was stern, his voice sharp. "Easy for you to say. You're rich, you're famous. Life is not heavy for you. You don't know what it means to suffer like we do." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. People turned toward the man, some ready to argue, but Keanu lifted his hand gently, signaling silence. He looked directly at the man, his eyes calm, yet filled with quiet pain. "You're wrong," Keanu said softly. "I do know suffering. I've lost people I love. I've walked through loneliness. I know what it feels like to wonder if the pain will ever end. But kindness is the one thing that always helped me keep moving. Not money, not fame, not success. Kindness." The man froze, his expression shifting. He sat back down slowly, his anger melting into thought. Keanu continued, "Pain doesn't care who you are. It finds everyone, but so does kindness, if we let it." His words hung heavy in the air, and for a long moment, no one moved. Then the little girl in the faded dress whispered loudly enough for all to hear, "He's telling the truth." Laughter rippled softly through the room, breaking the tension. Tears followed. People began clapping, not for a celebrity, but for the truth he carried. That night, donations poured in. Not because of Keanu's fame, but because his words touched something raw inside people. They saw him not as a star, but as a man who understood, who cared, who reminded them that kindness was still alive. When the event ended, Keanu slipped out quietly, avoiding the attention. But outside the hall, he stopped. The man who had challenged him earlier was waiting. His head was bowed, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry," the man said quietly. "I judged you without knowing. I thought you were untouchable. But your words, they reminded me of my wife. She used to say the same thing about kindness before she passed away." Keanu placed a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "She was right, and you can carry her words forward. That's how she stays with you." The man broke down in silent tears, and Keanu stayed beside him until his breathing steadied. No cameras, no spotlight, just two men standing under the streetlight, sharing the weight of grief and the strength of kindness. That moment, like the one on the street with the boy, became another thread in the quiet story of humanity, a story Keanu never tried to write, but one that continued to unfold around him. The weeks that followed seemed quiet, but inside Keanu's life, something was shifting. People he met on the street, strangers at coffee shops, even drivers at traffic signals, they all began stopping him, not to ask for autographs, but to share their own stories. An old woman held his hand once and said, "You reminded me of my husband. He always stopped for people in trouble." A teenager whispered, "I helped a homeless man yesterday, because of you." And one day, a man in a suit confessed, "I called my father. After years, your words about kindness made me realize I couldn't waste more time." Keanu listened to them all. He never claimed credit, never smiled with pride. He only nodded softly and reminded them, "The kindness was inside you all along. I just reminded you to use it." But not everyone celebrated his quiet actions. A media company decided to create a documentary about him. They sent reporters to follow him, recording every move, trying to turn his private life into entertainment. That one afternoon, as Keanu left a bookstore with a few worn-out novels in his hand, a reporter rushed forward with cameras flashing. Double quotes, "Keanu, why do you always act like a saint? Are you trying to fix your image? Is this all just a show?" Keanu stopped. His calm eyes studied the reporter. Silence stretched for a moment, long enough for the crowd to gather. Finally, Keanu spoke in a soft, steady voice. "Kindness is not a show. If you believe it is, maybe you've forgotten what kindness looks like." The reporter's face tightened, but Keanu simply walked away. The crowd, however, stayed behind. Whispers spread. Many looked at the reporter with disappointment, realizing the difference between chasing stories and living them. That evening, Keanu returned home to find a letter waiting for him. It was from the boy he had helped on the night of the accident. The handwriting was shaky but filled with strength. "Dear Keanu, I am walking again. The doctors said it will take time before I can run, but I don't care. Every step I take reminds me of that night. You held my hand when I was scared, and you gave me hope when I thought I would lose it. I told my father I want to be like you, not an actor, not famous, but someone who never walks past when someone needs help. I will never forget you. Thank you for giving me back more than my life. Thank you for giving me faith." As Keanu read the letter, he paused, closing his eyes. For a moment, his life had always been filled with shadows of loss, yet this boy's words felt like light breaking through. But the story was far from over. A few days later, Keanu visited a small children's hospital, quietly, without announcement. He walked through the halls, meeting kids who were fighting battles far tougher than fame or gossip. He sat beside their beds, listened to their stories, and laughed at their jokes. That a nurse whispered to him, "They don't see you as a star. They see you as hope." But not all the children smiled. In one corner room sat a boy no older than 12, silent, his face turned away. The nurse explained that he hadn't spoken in months after losing his parents in a car accident. Keanu entered the room slowly and sat on the floor, not on a chair, not above the boy, but on the ground so their eyes would meet. He didn't speak at first. He only sat quietly. Minutes passed. Finally, Keanu pulled out a piece of paper and began sketching a simple drawing of a car with wings. He slid the paper toward the boy. "It's a car that can fly," he said gently. "It doesn't get stuck in traffic. It doesn't crash. It only goes where you want it to." The The boy's eyes flickered for a moment, his lips trembled, but no words came. Keanu smiled softly, placed the drawing beside him, and stood up. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised. The next day, when Keanu returned, the paper was no longer on the floor. It was pinned to the boy's bedside, and this time, the boy whispered one word: "Thanks." It was the first word he had spoken in months. The nurses gasped, tears filling their eyes. Keanu only nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. The boy's voice returned slowly over the days that followed, and each time Keanu visited, they would draw together. Not just cars, but dreams. Places the boy wanted to see, things he wished to do. And through those drawings, life began to return to him. Outside the hospital, the reporters were waiting again. Some mocked him, some praised him, but Keanu kept his silence. Because inside those walls, something bigger was happening, something no headline could ever capture. And while the world argued about motives and fame, the children inside the hospital knew the truth. They had seen the man, not the star. They had felt the kindness that asked for nothing in return. And in that hospital, another story of faith in humanity quietly began to bloom. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Keanu sat quietly on a park bench. The world around him moved fast, children laughing, joggers passing, cars rushing by, but he sat still, lost in thought. The letter from the boy he had saved and the quiet moments at the children's hospital weighed on his heart. Not as a burden, but as a reminder of something he could not ignore. A young woman approached him carefully. She looked tired, her clothes simple, her eyes heavy with sadness. For a moment she hesitated, then she said softly, "You don't know me, but I know what you did for my brother." Keanu turned toward her, his calm expression inviting her to continue. "He's the boy from the hospital," she said, "the one who hadn't spoken in months. You made him smile again. You gave me my brother back." Her voice cracked, and she covered her mouth with her hand to hide the tears. Keanu lowered his gaze, shaking his head gently. "Your brother gave himself back. I just sat with him." But the young woman shook her head firmly. "No, you gave him something none of us could. Patience. You stayed when others gave up. And now he talks about dreams again. He says he wants to grow up and be like you." Keanu's eyes softened, but before he could respond, the young woman added something that changed the air completely. "My parents died in that car accident," she whispered. "I thought our family ended that day, but you reminded us it didn't. You gave us hope, and hope is everything." For a long moment, the world around them seemed to blur. Keanu reached out and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Hold on to that hope," he said. "It will carry you through the pain, and when you feel strong again, share it with someone else who has lost theirs." The young woman nodded, tears streaming down her face, but her expression was no longer broken. It carried a spark of strength. As she left, Keanu sat back on the bench. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, but inside, he felt the weight of responsibility grow stronger. Kindness had always been natural for him, but now it felt like a calling. Yet not everyone was touched the same way. A well-known TV host began running a segment about Keanu's acts of kindness. Instead of celebrating them, he mocked them. "Isn't it strange?" the host sneered. "How suddenly every act of kindness seems to have a camera nearby. Maybe Keanu Reeves is just building his image?" Laughter followed from the studio audience. The clips spread quickly online. Some people began doubting. Some questioned his motives. The words were sharp, unfair, and cruel. When Keanu heard about it, he did not defend himself. He did not release a statement. Instead, that night, he quietly visited a homeless shelter. He served food, washed dishes, and sat with the men and women who had nowhere else to go. There were no cameras, no announcements, only silent acts of care. A man at the shelter asked him, "Why do you come here when people make fun of you outside?" Keanu's answer was simple: "Because kindness doesn't stop when people misunderstand. And if it did, it wouldn't be kindness." Those words spread not through television, but through the voices of the homeless who had shared the evening with him, and slowly the world began to see the difference between noise and truth. One day, as he was leaving the shelter, an old man grabbed his hand. His eyes were cloudy, his clothes worn, but his voice steady. "You may not know it, son, but what you're doing is saving more than lives. You're saving faith." Keanu's chest tightened. He bowed his head slightly in respect and whispered, "Thank you." But deep inside, he knew his journey with kindness was not just about helping others. It was also healing parts of himself. Every hand he held, every tear he wiped, every life he touched gave him back a piece of hope he had lost long ago. Still, shadows lingered. There were people who wanted to expose him, to prove he was just like everyone else. And one of them was getting closer. The rumors and doubts continued to circle. One reporter, determined to expose Keanu, followed him for days. She wanted to prove that his kindness was staged, that behind the humble image there was something false. She tracked his movements, waiting for the moment to capture him failing. One night she saw him leave a shelter and walk down a quiet street. He carried no guards, no assistants, just himself. She followed, her camera ready. Suddenly, she saw him stop near a man sitting on the pavement. The man was shivering, wrapped in nothing but a torn blanket. Keanu bent down, spoke gently to him, and without hesitation removed his own jacket, placing it over the man's shoulders. Then he sat with him, sharing a sandwich he had bought earlier. There were no lights, no applause. It was just two human beings in the cold night. The reporter raised her camera, but her hand froze. Through the lens, she did not see a celebrity or an image. She saw something real, something unshakable. Her eyes filled with tears. Instead of pressing record, she lowered the camera. The next day, instead of publishing an exposé, she wrote an article titled, "The Man Who Chooses Kindness When No One Is Watching." It went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it was true. Meanwhile, the boy Keanu had once saved from the car accident finally walked out of the hospital. His father and sister stood proudly by his side. Reporters tried to ask him about the night of the accident, but the boy only said one thing. He didn't just save me, he showed me what I want to become. I want to be someone who stops, even when the world keeps moving. His words reached millions. People began sharing their own stories of kindness, some small, some life-changing, and slowly, a movement grew. Strangers helped strangers, families reconciled, communities came together. Keanu watched quietly from a distance. He never claimed it was his doing, he only smiled softly when people told him, "You inspired me." His answer was always the same, "You inspired yourself. I only reminded you of what you already had inside." But behind his calm smile, Keanu carried his own battles. His life had seen loss, grief, and loneliness. He knew what it meant to walk through darkness. Perhaps that was why his kindness felt so different. It came not from comfort, but from pain that had taught him the value of gentleness. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Keanu returned to the same park bench, where it had all started. The world around him was still rushing, but in the corner of that park, he sat in silence. An elderly woman approached him slowly, leaning on her cane. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "The world is loud, full of pride and anger. But you, sir, remind us that there is still quiet goodness left." Keanu gave a small smile and bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am. But the goodness has always been there. We just need to choose it." The woman nodded, her eyes misty. "You've restored faith in many hearts, including mine." As she walked away, Keanu leaned back on the bench, looking at the fading light. He knew stories would continue to swirl around him, some true, some false. He knew there would always be people who doubted, mocked, or misunderstood. But none of that mattered, because in the end, the truth was simple. Kindness does not need an audience. Kindness does not need applause. Kindness only needs to be given. And as long as there were people who chose it, humanity would never be lost. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air. A small smile touched his face. Somewhere in the city, someone was choosing kindness at that very moment, not because of fame, not because of recognition, but because it was right, and that was enough.